Hey everybody, welcome back to the NC State Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Tucker Sennett, the lead beat writer for NC State on SI here in Raleigh, North Carolina, covering the Wolfpack. Exciting episode for you today because the local media, had a chance to speak with NC State Athletic Director Boo Corrigan ahead of sort of the full school year and season here in Raleigh. Corrigan had a lot to say about a lot of different things. Obviously, being a athletic director in the world of college sports as they are today is hectic. It's a little crazy. And Corrigan has really done his best to navigate NC State through a lot of not necessarily tumultuous times for the school, but tumultuous times for the wider state of college athletics. A lot of those things are really out of his control, but he's been a pretty good steward of sort of what this athletic program is seeking to achieve. So I think I'll just run through a little background on Corrigan before we go into what he said. For those of you who aren't familiar, Corrigan became the athletic director in 2019 here at NC State after a pretty long, successful tenure at Army West Point, where he was the athletic director. He helped them to a pretty successful era in athletics there for a program that you know, it's difficult. It's difficult to to be consistent at Army just because of the recruiting challenges that they face. But Army was good, and he left that program in a place that was much healthier, I think, than when he got there. Um, Corrigan also served as the chairman of the College Football Playoff Committee from 2022 to 2023. He dealt with sort of the dilemma of Florida State in that 2023 season that I'm sure a lot of people are fairly familiar with. Did his best in a sort of impossible situation, but he served a pretty successful tenure. What he had to say today, sort of mostly related to the hot topics, which are revenue sharing, NIL, uh, the conference realignment world, all those issues, which are sort of constantly talked about in the college athletics space. And obviously, football drives a large number of these decisions. It's a massive influence on conference realignment, financial benefits for athletic programs. It's really the shoe drops with football. So I guess we'll start with the conference realignment world, just because obviously some news came out about that in the last couple of weeks with North Carolina reportedly exploring some moves to the SEC potentially. Clemson and Florida State were obviously kind of angling to get out of the ACC over the last few years and ended up coming back to the table, but things could end as soon as 2030 for those teams where they have more of an opportunity to get out of the ACC, given the grant of rights deal that was made, and that's the year where the quote unquote buyout becomes a little more feasible for those schools. And it's understandable why those schools want to get out of the ACC. Clemson, obviously being a massive football program in South Carolina, they feel like they can compete in the SEC, and likely that the college landscape is moving more toward these super conferences, with the Big Ten and the SEC expanding over the last few years. Where does that leave NC State? Corrigan sort of addressed that today. He he doubled down on the fact that NC State, is a proud member of the ACC. They're a founding member. They're happy where they are right now. I think there's no extreme desire to move, and he was pretty straightforward about how, winning if the conference as a whole performs well and NC State is a part of that, then these conversations will shift. Winning draws eyeballs. So in these TV type issues, NC State has a game at Notre Dame, which Corrigan made a joke about being a Notre Dame alum, was shifted to Peacock, and he said something along the lines of they really can't help him out, even though he's an alum. You'd think they'd treat him better. But yeah, that's a perfect example of a game that likely would have been a pretty big financial bonus for NC State had it been on NBC or on, a flagship network like ABC or ESPN, but instead it's going to be on one of these streaming services. So you lose some eyeballs there, you lose some potential revenue, which is a bummer for a school like NC State that's looking for excuses to sort of put themselves on the map. But with what's going on with North Carolina, Corrigan did say that this is something that NC State hasn't totally sat out on. His direct quote was, "Are we surveying the landscape? Of course we are." So even though North Carolina State is in his eyes, a prominent member of the Atlantic Coast Conference, there is a world where they get out because, as we saw with the Pac-12 falling apart, you don't want to be the last schools to get left out. Washington State and Oregon State sort of committed to rebuilding the Pac-12. And that sort of left schools like Stanford and Cal, who now are members of the ACC for whatever reason, on their own, figuring things out. And they did, but it was messy. And while losing three schools isn't the mass exodus that the Pac-12 had, where it was like eight schools, it's a big hit on the conference because you'd be losing an enormous brand in North Carolina, your strongest of at least of the last 10, 15 years, your strongest football program in Clemson, and your historically long, strong football program in Florida State. And you're left with sort of the middle of the road for the conference when it comes to football. NC State obviously being a solid program, but not towards the top more of Dave Doran's tenure than not, but not an elite program in that sense. So you don't want to become sort of an extra group of five conference with those teams exiting. So what would a move look like? Geographically, the SEC makes sense. However, does NC State have the firepower to compete? Would it even be worth it? Who knows? That's sort of a deeper question for people like Corrigan who are having to make these sorts of decisions. Another issue is that the revenue sharing system is getting going this year in college sports, and essentially this was an effort to sort of even the playing field out, level the playing field out, and make NIL still possible and important, but not to the extent that it was, because some of these schools had war chests that were just not really all that fair in competition with other schools. So the revenue sharing system basically provides each school with revenue from the conference, and they can disperse that revenue how they want. So NC State's number is $20.5 million. And when asked what the plan is for that money, Corrigan said that they're all in. He's more or less given he's empowered his coaches and his leaders to disperse that money through the new scholarship system, the new scholarship numbers, which are different for different sports, but scholarships are a huge advantage. If you can, um, get kids on a full scholarship, that's sometimes more appealing than those NIL dollars, especially for those Olympic sports and sports like baseball, where you're not going to necessarily be hauling in the NIL dollars. Now, the NIL collective for NC State is still going to have a role. What that role is hasn't really been clarified yet, and it's sort of going to be a trial and error as they navigate um, this new system, because it more or less was an effort to cut out some of these third party NIL collectives, but there's still a space for them. They're not altogether eliminated, and there's obviously a world where those can be really effective in luring players. As for the revenue sharing, I think NC State won't be any different than most schools. The way it'll be dispersed is to your primary revenue driving sports, which in NC State's case will be football and the two basketball programs. That might not be the case for every school. Schools in the Big Ten with the prominent volleyball programs like say Nebraska with their massive volleyball program, they're selling out their football stadium for volleyball games. They might look to disperse in different places, but NC State kind of knows where its strengths are, and if those sports are uplifted by that extra money, then they can generate more revenue, and that's better for the school long term, obviously for a number of reasons, but especially in this new system. So expect men's basketball and women's basketball to get a hefty portion of whatever's left over after football, and work with that. Um, Corrigan reiterated his excitement about Will Wade and his commitment to the fact that they were, how do I say this? They feel like they made the right decision and they did it the right way. There was a lot of talk during the NCAA tournament about how coaches were one foot out the door, with the way the calendar has come to be for college basketball. Um, an obvious example of that being Maryland with what is his name? Kevin Willard? Yes, Kevin Willard, who left Maryland to go be the coach for Villanova. Sorry about that, but um, they there's complaints about that happening with Wade. It was kind of obvious Wade was not going to stay with McNeese for another year. That was sort of a stepping stone job, and NC State saw him as a prime candidate. Corrigan did say that they've had a significant boost in season ticket sales at the Lenovo Center for men's basketball, which is an exciting development. Um, Getting people reinvigorated by men's basketball and Raleigh, I think is a huge goal for Corrigan and this athletic program as a whole, because this is a program that has great history, and has recent success. So if they can sort of activate this region when it comes to basketball, that's just another piece adding to your war chest every year. So that was an exciting development, and they're going to do whatever they can to stay competitive financially, when it comes to hanging with these large SEC and Big Ten schools, and whatever they can do to increase that war chest, they will. What else? Carter Finley Stadium was kind of a big subject over the last year, as more and more colleges are starting to explore naming rights deals. Um, that's becoming more prevalent, even though, history and whatnot, people aren't super fired up about it some places, but Carter Finley Stadium could benefit from this in a big way, and it would obviously be a huge boon for the athletic program. It didn't happen this year, but Corrigan's pretty confident given sort of the corporate world of Raleigh, that a naming rights deal will happen in the future. Obviously, they have the Lenovo Center. That's a partnership with the Hurricanes. So a naming rights deal will go a long way in getting some extra revenue for these programs. And it's a net plus for the school, even if it might kind of mess with some of the history of the athletic program. And um, Corrigan did talk a little bit about the upcoming football season. Dave Doran and the Wolfpack football team coming off in a lot of ways a disappointing 6-7 campaign with a bowl loss last year. They've remade themselves in some ways, not in all ways, but they've brought in a lot of new players, and that's a sign of the school adapt or of the program adapting to this new world with transfers. And, kind of goes back to that war chest and Corrigan reiterating that he wants NC State to be the best it can be. And to do that, they need to adapt. And, he's pretty confident that Doran's ability to produce leaders will sort of rise in this current form of college football. He thinks, there's a competitive advantage in mixing transfers with a culture that exists and players that exist, and Doran is still the right guy to do that. When asked what his idea of success looks like for the upcoming season, he said it's hard not to go into any season thinking that you shouldn't win ever or that you should win every game. Um, so his expectation is that this program will be competitive. It's been competitive the entire time Doran's been there, but it's more about reaching that next step. And Corrigan did say, bowl games are good. They're a net positive, even though, I know that the NC State fan base is sort of fed up with being an 8-win team, going to the same bowl games over and over again. And they want that next step that's just never quite been there. And in an expanded playoff, that's possible. And that's how Corrigan feels. He thinks that sort of the new format will benefit NC State long term, so long as they're a contributor to the conference in staying competitive. And if they do their job, they have just as good a chance as anybody else. So clearly some endorsement of Doran in a year where, things started to slip in terms of support, and he's been there a long time, and people might want to see some change, but I wouldn't anticipate that unless, the bottom falls out on this program. I think Doran probably walks away when he wants to, just because it's more or less his program, and they're not going to do much better out there. It would be a hard reset to go away from a guy like that. But all in all, Corrigan seems pretty optimistic about the upcoming year for NC State athletics. There's a lot to be excited about. I mean, this football team should improve. I think that's the bar at the very minimum. Um, and I think, everything else that happens after that is sort of up in the air. And then obviously basketball is a huge, exciting new era. There's a lot that could be great. And I think the school knows that they have a window here with Wade to really grow this program back into a power and compete with the schools down the road. and they're trying to take advantage of that, whether it's backing him financially or giving him the resources in terms of facilities and whatnot to really elevate this program to the level that UNC and Duke are, and to have them be a perennial NC State contender. So that's kind of everything that Corrigan had to say, and sort of the outlook on from the athletic director's standpoint on the upcoming season. It's an exciting time. Only a few weeks away from that East Carolina game where things kind of get going, and some of those Olympic sports that we'll have coverage of are close to getting on the way. Um, and before you know it, it'll be November, and Will Wade will be leading those guys out for their debut. But all in all, exciting time to be a Wolfpack fan, exciting time to cover the Wolfpack. We'll be back here again every day. Tune in, more Wolfpack updates. I'm Tucker Senate again. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at Senate Tucker or the official NC State on SI account at Wolfpack on SI on X. And follow our Facebook page. Throw some likes on there. You can find these episodes on YouTube, on sports videos on SI. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.